Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, to the channel IT Simplified. I hope you're finding the videos useful and subscribing to the channel. In today's video on Azure, I'm here to talk about Azure Firewall. And yes, you heard it correctly. It is Azure Firewall. It is not Cisco, Fortinet, Barracuda, Palo Alto. I'm talking about Azure Firewall, and who would have thought that Microsoft will get into the firewall business? But here we go. We are in the public cloud, and this is one of the new offering, which is GA from Microsoft. So, if you want to know about how to configure deployment, test from end to end, I'll say stick with me in this video, and we'll configure everything from scratch. So the question arises, what is Azure Firewall? So in nutshell, it's a stateful firewall, and because it's in public cloud, it is highly available and highly scalable, which comes with any public cloud offering. So that's a great way in case you want to secure your network. You can deploy Azure Firewall with that. And as we know that there is a stateless and stateful firewall, there is an argument of which one is better. But if I have to describe in simple terms, stateless is much more faster and good for high traffic, whereas a stateful firewall is good in analyzing unauthorized access and those kind of stuff. So there are a lot of documentation that you can go, but both of them, they have its own characteristic. But Azure Firewall, the important thing to know is a stateful firewall. It's like a PaaS offering, so you don't need to do any high availability. That is built in, and it is highly scalable. The second question that will arise is how much it actually costs. So let's look at that. So if I go to my pricing calculator and go to firewall and pick this, there are basically two costs associated with this. So one is the fixed cost, basically. So if it's running 744 hours, so 24/7 in a month, which is run by 1130, and I'm talking about Canadian dollar. You can always change the currency. So this will be a fixed cost, which is the major chunk of the cost, and the other cost, which is variable, will depend upon the egress, so inbound and outbound traffic. And just to give you an idea about, if I just move this number to say 100 gig, you'll see on an average it is close to 365 for inbound and outbound for each. But the major cost we're talking about is the firewall deployment, which is 1130, and this is the monthly cost. So that's what you need to keep in mind when you're thinking of deploying from the pricing point of view. Okay, so that was the theory part in brief, and the pricing associated with that. So what we'll do is now we'll configure everything from scratch, and we'll do the testing how that works. So as we always do, let's start by creating a resource group in which are all the everything will be deployed so that it makes the management much more easier. And I'm going to name this firewall resource group and deploy this in my preferred location and click on create. Okay, so the second step we're going to do is to create virtual network. So go to VNets and let's name this firewall VNet, and we'll play with specific address space. You can choose whatever you want, but I'm using this for this example, and deploy this in existing resource group. And for the subnet for this firewall, I'll give an important thing here is that make sure that the naming convention is it should be Azure Firewall subnet, and the address range will be for this subnet .1.0, and it's going to be class C subnet. and rest everything you can leave that to the default and go to create. So our firewall will be deployed in this subnet, and make sure that this naming convention is same, which is Azure Firewall subnet. So the deployment is in progress. So let's go inside this firewall, and in this we'll create another subnet in which we'll be deploying a server for the testing purpose. So let's go inside this firewall and create another subnet. Now I'm going to name this server 1 subnet, and this will be under the 2.0 with class C, and we have not right now we're not configuring any route table. We're going to come to that and go to OK. Okay, so that was added too. So far we have configured we have created a resource group, then we create the virtual network, and in that we created two subnet, one for the firewall and the other one for the server, one in which I'll be deploying this server. So that is what we have done so far. So what we're going to do now is go to virtual machine, go to add, and deploy this server 1 in the subnet, the one we just created. So under the public inbound port, we are not going to open any port. We'll see how the experience is to route that through the firewall, and go to next. You can pick the disk, and in this step make sure that you deploy this under the subnet which we want, which is server 1, and under the public IP we don't want this in we don't want to give any public IP to this, and public inbound port is none, and go to next. We don't want any book diagnostic for this testing. Review and create, and after the validation passes we can just go hit create. Okay, so the deployment is in place, so it will take some time. So what we're going to do is now we'll go to firewalls, and if you don't see the firewall in here, you can just go to create a resource and just type in firewall, and you can see that there are different options available. So if you go just select firewall, it will take you to the first. So the first option is from Microsoft, and you can just hit and create. And here we'll deploy this under the resource group, the one that we created, and give the name. I'm going to name it firewall 101, and under the virtual network we'll deploy this under the firewall virtual network, and for the public IP address it will be the standard, so you can leave that to the default, which is okay. So that's why I've said in case you don't give the same naming convention, which is Azure Firewall subnet in the previous step, that the one that we created, you'll get an error. So it's very important that you use the same naming convention, and go to review and create, and just hit create button. So our virtual machine with the name server 1 was I think created successfully, though it's still showing creating, but I think that was done. Okay, and let me also check the firewalls. If I go to my firewall and expand this, you'll see that it seems to be ready to. So what we're going to do is we'll configure some rules because we want our traffic to be routed through the server 1. So actually it's still getting updated, so just wait for a second. Okay, so the firewall was deployed successfully. So two things that we'll be needing over here is the private IP of our firewall as well as the public IP of our firewall. So the private IP is 192.168.1.4, and if I expand the public IP, because everything will be routed through this, it's 40.82.189.83. So we have got this so far, and hopefully the virtual machine was also created successfully. So let me just go there. It's still creating. And here you can see that there is no public IP because we specifically didn't wanted this to be open, and also we have not opened any RDP port, so we're gonna do that through the firewall. But for that we need to configure some rules under the firewall setting, which we're gonna do in a moment. But just gonna wait for this firewall to this server 1 deployment to complete. Okay, so the server 1 seems to be deployed successfully. So if I go to my server 1 and go to the networking, And under the network interface, you will see that I have a private IP at least for this machine, which will note down. It is in dynamic state right now. It is 192.168.2.4, which will be needing when we configure the rules within firewall. But what I want is I want to make this static, so you can just expand this and go and save the settings. So basically it's changing that private IP of our server 1 to the static. Okay, so that was also saved successfully. Okay, so let's do this way now. Let's also configure some of the rules because I want that traffic to be routed through the firewall. So in case I want to access server 1. So what we will be doing is let's go to the firewall and expand this. And under the settings, you have this rules option. So let's expand that. And we'll add Nat Rule Collection. So you can go to the plus button. And I'm going to name this, say, Nat Rule 1. I'll give this a priority 100. And you can just give the name here. I'm gonna name this, say, RDP rule. And under the protocol, I will pick TCP. Just to keep this simple, I'm gonna open from all the source addresses, and the destination address over here, I'll give the public IP of my firewall, which is 4082.189.83, and the destination port is 3389, which is an RDP port, and the translated port will be again 33 translated address. I will give the private IP of my server 1, which is 2.4, and the translated port will be 3389, and you click on add. Because as I said that when we configure the server 1, we didn't open any RDP port, so what we want is we want the traffic to be routed through firewall. So we'll see that if you're able to log in into that server through that RDP connection via the firewall. So it says that it is updating the firewall, so let's wait for that to complete. the rule was added successfully, so far so good. So let's go and try to RDP into the server. We'll try to use the public IP of our firewall, which is 189.83. So let me just plug that in. It's 83, and go to connect, provide the credentials. So as you can see over here now that I have RDP into our server 1 via the public IP of firewall by just adding a rule within the firewall, and I'm logged into my server 1. And right now if I want to go to any website, I should be able to go. So if I want to go, say, if I want to go say bbc.com, I should be able to reach that website. So let me just see if I'm able to. Okay, so I'm able to go to BBC. I am able to go to say search Google. I'm able to search everything, so there is no restriction so far. So that's okay. We'll change that in a moment, and we'll see what are the steps associated with that. So let's minimize this. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let me go back to my portal, and we will associate this with the route table. And as you know that by default all the traffic will be blocked. So let me just go to the route table, and if you don't see, just go to I believe under all services, and you can just do a search for route table. Here we go, and then you can just create a route table by going to add button. So basically what we'll do is we'll associate our route table with the Azure Firewall, and we'll add the subnet of our server 1 so that the traffic will be blocked. So let's test that. So let's give a name. Name it route table 101, and deploy this under the resource group that we have, which is firewall resource group, and go to create. Okay, so it was created. So if I refresh, my route table should appear, but we have just created the route table. We have not configured anything. So what we'll do is go inside this, And under the settings, we can go to routes and go to the add and give this name. So I'm going to name it my route table, and under the address prefix I'm going to block basically everything, so everything will be blocked. And under the next hop type I'm going to use this virtual appliance, so basically Azure Firewall. The next hop address I will give the private IP of my firewall, which is .1.4, and click OK. And after that is done, we'll add the subnet of our server 1, so that everything is restricted. So you go to subnets, after that go to associate, and under the virtual network pick our firewall virtual network, and under the subnet you pick the server 1 subnet. That's very important, not the firewall subnet, and click on OK. So that was also added successfully, so everything seems to be fine. But let's go inside our server, and now let me try to go to the website BBC, and as you can see that there is no rule which allows now the traffic, because as I said that when you put that in route table, by default everything is closed. So I'm not able to reach Google, I'm not able to reach BBC, so that's all blocked. So what we'll do is we'll change this by going inside the firewall. So now let's go to the firewall. In our case it's firewall 101, and go under the rules, and now we'll create application rule collection. So let's go to application rule collection, and we'll add application rule collection. So as you can see that there is an add button, so go inside and add it, and I'll name this, say, rule 1, and I can give this priority, say 1000. So as you know that priority, lower the priority, it's got the first availability, so 1000 will have a better priority than say 2000. So, and what we'll want to do is we want to allow the action allow, and we can specify the fully qualified domain name over here. So in this case I'm going to say allow BBC. Under the source address I will keep it simple, and the protocol I'm going to put it HTTP as well as HTTPS, and the target FQDN will be bbc.com. So I'm going to do bbc.com, and I will allow this. So if this rules get published successfully, hopefully I will be able to reach bbc.com from that server 1, and that's the only website I'll be able to reach, nothing else. So let's see if you're able to do that or not. Okay, so the rule was added successfully. Let's go and test by trying to reach that website. So I'm going to go to bbc.com, And here you go, you can see that now I'm able to reach my website, the one that I specified, the fully qualified domain name. And you can still see that I'm not able to reach, say, google.com. It's still blocked. But let's also add one more rule and see if I'm able to reach google.com or not. So let's go to add application rule. I'm going to name it rule 2. Let's give this a priority, say 2500. I want to allow this. You can obviously allow or deny any specific fully qualified domain name. And in this case, I'm going to say allow Google, right? And the source address, if you have a specific pool of address, you can also specify over here. I'm going to use both HTTP and HTTPS. And you can give the target FQDN, which is in my case gonna be google.com. I have specified different rules for that, but obviously you can add multiple FQDNs over here. You don't need to make a separate rule for that, but you see that you get the idea. At least you know how I can add the fully qualified domain name to allow the traffic. You can also go and have a network rule collection at the DNS level. So you can also configure there. So there are a lot of options. But let me see that if I'm able to reach google.com, which was denied uh, in that server. Okay, so the second rule was also added successfully. So let me see, I should be able to reach now google.com. And here we go. I'm able to reach both Google as well as BBC. And if I still want to reach, say, any other website, I should be denied. So if I want to reach, say, CNN, I won't be able to reach, right? So that's how you will configure these different rules within Azure. And you saw from end to end what is the experience in configuring, creating the Nat rule, the application rule. You can also have a network rule collection, and you can add that. So there are different ways you can configure depending upon your environment and the access policy that you want to specify within this environment. So I think this is a great tool that you can utilize. It is not comparable still to some of the other firewall vendors, but I will say that it is pretty attractive. It gives you an option along with some other vendors that you can deploy. It's a Microsoft native tool, and it is also integrated with, say, Azure Log Analytics, and I think they will be also coming with integration with Azure Security Center as well as just-in-time VM access to have still better control and get a complete control of what traffic you will allow to your virtual network within the Azure environment. I hope this video was useful to you. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.